What is cracking, everybody? It's MegapiemanPHD here, and welcome to another Jumpstart developer interview. Today I will be interviewing Hank Zwally from Mojo Game Studios about their Kickstarter for their game Cradle. How you doing today, Hank?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm doing alright. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is you do?
So, as you already said, I'm Hank Zwally, and I'm the founder and lead designer and president at Mojo, which is a bunch of terms to basically say that I am the original vision and sort of creative force behind, and also the manager and the person who makes sure that that vision is translated into an actual game and gets done. To give credit where credit is due, we have a fantastic team of designers who fills out that vision and helps to flesh that from concept into reality, and that are just as integral. But yeah, that pretty much sums up my role. I imagine what the game is and make it happen.
Sounds pretty cool. You kind of lead everyone in the right direction.
Yeah, pretty much. That's another way to sum it up.
So Cradle is the project you're currently trying to get started. What exactly is Cradle?
Well, Cradle is a first-person melee fantasy RPG set in the setting of Anora, which is a fantasy world ruled by the five gods that were once one. You take up the mantle of an exiled traveler who is running from the wrath of Ostia, one of the gods. Through trying to save yourself and escape this wrath, you end up traveling to a bygone land filled with forgotten stories and restoring this land and its people and this shunned god who these people worshipped back to the land of Anora, and through which save yourself.
So what kind of game is Cradle? Is it a RPG? Is it a first-person kind of game?
I hate comparing to other games because it's, I always gives people sort of a constricted view, but if you were to look at it in terms of other games, imagine a Skyrim with a skillful and deterministic combat system, one that allows you to translate your intent as a player and the actions that you would want to have as a powerful swordsman or a powerful melee fighter into the game, rather than random animations or hack and slash. That would be the easiest way to sum it up, but it's a lot more than that too, in that we take a lot of steps to try to bring you guys the most immersive experience we possibly can, whether that's ensuring that our UIs and how people interact with the gameplay systems are non-intrusive and intuitive, to ensuring that when you use items in the game, you're not pausing and going to menus to bring you out of the game, keeping that player immersed and fully into the experience of Cradle for as long as we possibly can.
And you guys are looking to raise $350,000 through Kickstarter to do this. Now, that is a very high number. You don't usually see a lot of Kickstarters to get that high. Now, it's understandable when it comes to your game, because your game is absolutely gorgeous from all the screenshots and video I've seen of it. You guys have been working in the Cryengine, I believe, to make
Yes, that is correct.
A really in-depth game. How is it that you came to the figure of $350,000?
Well, basically what we're looking at here is, and I can't tell, if we could have told people, we would have already, but the problem is part of it is under NDA with Crytek. But the bottom line is we need to cover costs for a lot of different things, whether it's engine costs and other software and middleware costs, to the cost of doing freelance work and getting others to join the team and make Cradle a reality. How we came to 350 is you first have to understand our business model, which is essentially that everyone who is a member at Mojo, at least of the team that's not freelance, we are all partners in Mojo. We are partners in this company, and we all receive a percentage of the profits that come from the release of our game. So in reality, nobody is being salaried or working on a salary. We are all working on all the time we have to give to this, and even us working full-time, what we receive is a stipend to live off of in the meantime that is, in fairness, then deducted out of our total royalties that we get from the game. So because everyone's a partner in Mojo and everyone is working together with our shared passion to create this game, we are really able to keep the development costs very low when it comes to the main personnel. And so the 350 is to cover, as I said, middleware and other software, and to cover the freelance and the full. To make a huge open world game like what we're going to be creating, we estimate and hope to provide about 70% the size of Skyrim between our 4 open worlds. And to do that, we need to have a ton of freelancers and other 3D modelers who will be able to bring this game to life. And so the rest of that money goes to freelancing and getting the talent we need to create the in-game assets to make this happen.
Now, you guys at Mojo Game Studios, you have a pretty big team from what I've been able to see that already, well, a lot bigger than a lot of teams that I see who put things up on Kickstarter. And the game that you're trying to make seems like it's not the kind of game you would normally see an indie team trying to put together just because of how big
I would
that it
even
ends
go
up
so
being.
far as to say that we've never seen an indie team try to put a game together this big before. Not one that hasn't been backed by somebody like Microsoft at some point in their process.
Right. So because of that, I can imagine that it's going to be a huge challenge for you guys to be able to fill all of that in and make sure that it's a nice, diverse world and to make sure that everything works. Because you don't really see that kind of thing come from... You don't even see a lot of AAA developers try to make something that big.
No, and the biggest reason behind why we don't see more games of this scale or the size or magnitude is because of rework in games. And this is very well known across the board. Rework and redoing stuff after you have already designed it is very costly in terms of the full production. The only way we're able to make this happen is we have a novel, and I can't talk about it all the way, but we have an approach to the way we both manage and design that enables us to get little to no rework through the full process of development. And what that enables then is that when we make a design, when we move through with a design into the actual creation of these objects and of everything that is in game, we are very confident behind this, and we have seen so far and expect to continue to see very little to no rework, which then drastically reduces development costs and time frames. And quite frankly, there's no way we could do this without it.
Since you compared this game to a game like Skyrim, and you're talking about rework, it does remind me of one of the things that I found out with Skyrim. Not only does it end up being a very glitchy game, apparently when they originally made the game, they made the walls too thin or something about it, so you could actually use objects to glitch through walls. Mm-hmm. And they only figured this out after they had already built so much of the game that they just couldn't go back and fix it all. So it's interesting to hear you say that you're making it step by step to make sure you don't have to go back and fix things. But it being a big open world game, how do you guys expect to deal with the fact that pretty much any open world game usually has a lot of glitches and bugs, especially when you're talking about something like Skyrim or Fallout, other games that Bethesda have made. They've always got a big problem with glitches and bugs just because of how massive everything is. How do you guys plan to tackle that and deal with that for your game?
Well, I'd like to mention one game that doesn't have those bugs. So Far Cry 3, that is. It's not very buggy compared to the rest of the open world games we've seen, and I lend that to a number of factors, but one of which is the engine. So Bethesda's engine is proprietary and developed by them, and hasn't been tested in outside companies. It's only their company. So by definition, it's going to be more buggy to begin with, unless they were exceptionally, just given the assumptions we can make. Cryengine has been tested across the board with plenty of different companies and used on far more titles than any engine that has been used for an open world game other than Far Cry, which used, again, the preliminary Cryengine before it was taken and changed for Far Cry. And so the first thing here is that we have an engine that doesn't produce a lot of the same types of open world bugs you would run into. And what I mean by this are things like falling through the map, the glitches where events go off and it doesn't work, things like that. The other part of it is, and so that's the first part of how we will keep it from being so buggy, or as buggy. The second part is testing as we go along. So part of our design process that enables us to be so without rework is that we catch the rework, any that we need to do, really early on. And that's because as we're building, as soon as something is starting building, it goes right into testing. And so ideally, with this process of testing early and testing frequently, as we go, we will catch the bugs before they become long-standing global bugs that'll take a while to find in such a huge world.
You have mentioned a lot that you're working with the Cryengine, and the main reason why you're working, or one of them, is because that it's a good engine to use when you want to build a big open world thing like this. Now, the first interview that I ever did was with the developer of Ghost of a Tale, who told me that he originally started building his game in Cryengine, but that it was a very difficult thing to do. Of course, he was working by himself, and then he moved over to Unity and basically made everything he had previously made in like 3 months. So I've heard that Cryengine is a very difficult engine to work with.
I would say it's the hardest engine to work with.
What were some of the decisions to go with that engine instead of, since you guys are an indie team, instead of working with something like Unity or the Unreal Engine or any other engine?
And that's a question we get a lot because it seems so. Yes, Cryengine provides, as you said, and one of the reasons we went through it is they actually provide the most advanced toolkit for building an open world. Now, they provide this and also the exceptional graphic capability that they have, but at the cost of usability in the engine, which you alluded to. And so CryEngine's hard to work with. There's no getting around it. But the perks that we get from it are seemingly worth it. And so the reasoning behind this comes from, one, it has all of these different capabilities for making a beautiful open world. One of the things it gives that other engines don't is called voxel terrain sculpting. Voxel terrain sculpting is this idea that you are able to create caves and create any sort of depressions or anything you'd want to do with your terrain directly with the terrain rather than having to create geometry outside of that. This then allows us to create seamless open worlds. So in Skyrim, when you go in a cave, you have this pause between the cave. There's a loading screen. You will never experience that in Cradle due to voxel terrain sculpting. The other thing is that they allow for massive maps and vegetation. And really, when it comes to just the toolkit for building an open world, there's nothing better. And we overcome a lot of the technical issues via two things. One, support from Crytek, and two, we're lucky enough to have a team of some of the best programmers that we could find. And again, I say lucky enough because, again, we are really lucky to have what we have in terms of programming. If you didn't know, all of our programmers are from Carnegie Mellon University, which is one of the top programming universities in the world, and is top 3 for the United States, and these are some of the brightest kids that we've been able to get there. And so these professionals that we have in programming have really given us a leg up in terms of being able to work with the Cryengine.
Well, that's pretty cool that you're able to get your hands on some really good programmers that really help you build out and expand upon the Cryengine.
We couldn't do it without them,
yeah.
No question.
So we talked a bit about under the hood of Cradle, but let's talk a bit about outside of the hood, what you're actually playing and looking at. Now, from what I have seen, the game does look really good, and I can imagine that the pictures you have shown off and the trailers you've shown off have used the highest settings you can possibly get. I don't necessarily have the newest computer, and I know there's a lot of people out there as well. How do you plan on not only letting people who have high-end computers get a good experience out of this, but people who have low-end computers also have the same kind of experience?
Well, simply put, it has to do with two things. One, when we're going to be releasing the game, and two, just sort of our methodology behind design here. So we are, of course, designing with multiple settings, low graphics to high graphics. And with this, our current settings are enabled, our lowest current settings run very well on what we would consider to be the average computer in our time right now. So if you extrapolate that to 2 years from when we're going to, for about when we will plan on releasing, the average computer then will be, of course, much stronger than what it is today. And so given that, we expect pretty much anyone who has a average level, even a laptop, average level computer that for that time to be able to run Cradle no problem. And for anyone who needs to or who wants to run it on the highest graphics, well, we build it originally on a computer with the best internals that you can get without going supercomputer right now, and we are building it to that degree of fidelity and capability. You have things that you turn on and off that really affect frame rate, that add a lot of detail and beautifulness to the world, that can really be, once turned off, really decrease the threshold for computers. And one of these examples is, if I'm sure you know of, is tessellation. When you tessellate everything in an environment, it becomes much more frame rate intensive. So, of course, tessellation on and off is one of the many things that we're doing.
Well, it's nice to hear that you guys are designing around the fact of allowing your game to work on as many systems as possible, just so that anybody who wants to play it can play it.
Well, our goal is to bring it to as many people as would want to play it. We don't want people to be limited by any sort of socioeconomic bullshit.
Right. So when people are looking at your amazing environments, what kind of environments would they be seeing? What sort of environments will we find in the world of Cradle? I remember you made some talk about them on your Kickstarter page.
Yes. So Cradle is So Cradle starts you in the open, or the only linear section of the entire game called the Titanwood. The Titanwood is, you can think of as and that's what is showcased in our Kickstarter video and across the board. We decided when developing that we wanted to build the beginning of the game so that people could get that introduction into what we're doing. And so the Titanwood, as I said, is the only linear portion, and it is a ancient, mystical, overgrown forest that is thought to be haunted by the people beyond the wood. Of course, it isn't. It is mystical and beautiful, and in no way negatively haunted. But this has deterred people from ever moving into the Titanwood. And so you as a player, when you travel into the Titanwood, escaping this wrath of Ostia, trying to find some sort of solace and refuge from it, you stumble upon the Shrine of Adoran, the only remaining link to Adoran's people and to Adoran's lands that have been removed. Adoran is one of the gods that have been removed and taken away from Cradle. So you travel from the Titanwood, through the Titanwood, into the shrine, and from that shrine into the bygone land that is Adoran's Cradle. And so in the Cradle, you are first warped into the temple at the center of Adoran's lands. This is the prime shrine to Adoran, the center of worship for him. And since the removal of Adoran's lands in the Soulfire Crisis from Anora, all of his lands that were once connected have been separated for various reasons, whether it be by mountain ranges that are uncrossable or through chasms that have been ripped apart in the land. And so with this, you access 4 independent open worlds through this, what we like to refer to as the level hub, this main cathedral of Adoran. And so each of these 4 open worlds is entirely distinct and have color palettes and different emotioneering effects that we wish to achieve throughout each of these. The 4 environments are, first, and these are in no particular order, but the quarry. The quarry was once the center, and this is all of the green and overflowing water and hills and mountains with, covered in lush and vegetation. That's all that concept art is for the quarry. And so the quarry used to be the center of mining and industry for Cradle, or for Adoran's people and in Cradle. However, since the fall, it has become overgrown and taken over by the wilds. And so it's lush, it's completely covered in foliage, and strewn throughout this beautiful, imagine the combination of northern Pacific cloud forests and the jungle of Meghalaya. Mash those two together, and this is the environment you get with the quarry. And then strewn throughout this are these cities and leftover mining operations and all of that civilization that used to be there. Then we have the Iceland, which is a snow-capped mountains that are really volcanoes. So you have this large landscape of mountains and almost tundra-esque big sweeps of snow and glaciers, and then strewn throughout this and flowing in this world is the lava and the erupting volcanoes that are the Iceland. This area, of course, used to be inhabited and is filled with different peoples of Adoran's lands. And I'll just make that as a general statement. Because Adoran's people are no longer his people, they are these corrupted, changed individuals that are no longer sentient in any good sort of way, but are instead husks of what they used to be. All of these environments have the remnants of civilization and the cities and leftover towns and such that are now inhabited by these monsters of what they used to be. And it's important to note, too, that in Cradle, the way we're dealing with NPCs, and I know this is tangential to the environments, but is this idea that there are the 4 guides, one for each environment, that will be essentially your main both quest giver and interaction throughout these environments. They act as the link to the past, in a sense, and no pun intended. And then in addition to these NPCs, we also have these, what we like to call anomalies, which are basically individuals, beasts, creatures, humans, just any being that could be sentient or could become sentient that has survived the corruption of the Soulfire Crisis and is only twisted and slightly changed from what they used to be. Still sentient and still varying levels of good or bad in what they were before. Now, in the Iceland, as I said, you have these mountains and this lava. Well, juxtaposed with this, you have the desert, which is this windswept badlands, which is a combination of areas like Petra and the Navajo leftover cities built into the sides of cliffs, and take that together and mix that with these beautiful caverns of desert design and windswept plains, with the desert, and oases, and this is what you have as the desert. It's a little bit different than a normal desert in that we go a lot more with the cliffs and caves aspect of it rather than the open sandy plains. And because we found that that's fairly boring in a lot of games, and we wanted to make it a little more lively. And then the last area that you play through in the last environment is called the Bayou. The Bayou was once the main port and cultural hub of Adoran's lands. And this is where all the trade and, I would say, liveliness would happen for the most part. And from after this metropolis was ruined through the Soulfire crisis, it has then been overtaken by the swamp and the fungus and mushrooms and so forth that were native to the land. With the addition of the pollution and everything caused by the industry in the quarry, which is upriver to the bayou, and the pollution from the city center that was the bayou, these once more docile fungus and environmental foliage is now out there to get you, in a sense, and has come with a bit more malicious intent than you would ever imagine from it. And those are the 4 environments of Cradle. 4 main environments. The 5th, of course, is that beginning one. And of course, each of these has a different color palette, as I said. So the Bayou is very the quarry is very green and blacks and sort of that, whereas the Iceland is reds and blues and whites, and then so forth.
Now, you mentioned a bit about quests, and being the kind of game that it is, you would think that they would have quests in it. Can you give us an idea of how the quests will go? Will it be side quests? What kind of things you'll be doing? Will it be your basic kill a certain number of this and then grab its eyes and turn it and that kind of thing?
No. So questing and Cradle, we come from the fact that the number one thing that the sort of overall concept of what we're trying to deliver is an adventure. We want people to go on an adventure and to have an experience of that. Well, on an adventure, we don't want ever somebody to feel like they're doing a to-do list or a chore list. And so in Cradle, what questing is instead is, it is 2 things. It is the following of the main story and the main arc through the game, which is extremely important to us. Narrative design is one of the foundations of what Cradle is. And we believe that some of the best games come when you have a great integration of excellent gameplay and compelling narrative, and we want to capture that. And that's the main quest, the main story of Cradle. Now, in addition to this, the quest givers, quote, these guides, will only act as part of the quest givers in the world, and a fraction of it. Our environments are designed to tell a story and to be characters in and of themselves, to be something that the player can experience and not just the place for the plot to play out. And so with this, you will be getting a lot of your quests and a lot of your side quests that are all the things that will augment the main story and add on to it and be the exploration through Cradle beyond the main story. These are not just given by the guides. Some of them will be, but they are also given by the environment itself through things that you acquire, whether that be treasure maps or a book that hints at the location of a special object or a lost forge, or that could also be things like just a tapestry describing a battle that once passed there that leads you to a tunnel that takes you down. And so in Cradle, questing is about discovering and finding information about the world around you and about the history that used to be Adoran's people, and then taking that information and following it to the reward. So in implementation, what this means is that you have, instead of a quest journal or something like that, you have this journal that you are keeping notes in as you find out more about the story that unfolds. So to give an example of this, imagine that you are stumbling through the bayou and you find this dilapidated, broken down library, and in this library you find a scroll that talks of this great weaponsmith who forged who was well renowned, and his forge was located high in the mountains of the quarry. So you travel to the quarry from the bayou, so you go back from the bayou and you travel to the quarry, and in the high mountains of the quarry you find this forge. And so written down in your book prior to this is just the idea that this forge is located somewhere high in the mountains of the quarry, somewhere in this general area, and that the other key information information that you would gain from the book that was there. Then or the scroll that was there. Then when you reach this forge, when you actually eventually go to it, you find out that you find information that tells you that this great weaponsmith created a weapon of great power that was then taken away, used in battle, and then hidden afterwards somewhere in the lowlands of the quarry, in the caves. So you go down to the lowlands of the quarry, and of course this is also recorded in your journal. And so you continue this process of back and forth until you learning new information and discovering about the world around you, and that then eventually guides you and leads you to the end. And of course, you'll be fighting different monsters throughout this process that will be what we look at as obstacles in your path to completing that particular adventure or journey, whether those be jumping puzzles or brain games in the sense of puzzles that are based on things that you know in the world and in the story or the lore, or combat, straight up combat, and your ability to find, in addition to that, find the things you need to make combat happen.
So will you be given a quest marker once you find this information, or will you have to discern the locations of these things through the information that you've already found, or would it be like something written on a map or something like that?
To be honest, I'd say neither and both. Part of our development strategy is to not tack down things that we are not sure about until we have more implementation knowledge about it. So with something like that, we're trying to provide the most immersive experience, but at the same time we want it to be intuitive and easy for players to use. So whether or not we put a quest marker will entirely depend on the feedback we get as we develop the quest in game.
Right, it's a very good attitude to have something like that, because you wouldn't want to try to force something on players and they end up having no idea where they're supposed to go.
For sure, and we understand that there's this, no matter how much we want people to just get from the game itself and not have a UI or something overlaying that makes it feel gamey, we understand that it's still a game and you need to convey this information, no question. And the bottom line is that conveying the right information is more important, than creating something that only certain people will be able to access because we're not conveying it as well.
Right. Now, one of the biggest things that I've heard you guys talk about with Cradle is the combat. Could you explain to me a little bit about that and how that works?
I would love to. That's sort of my baby, and that's my favorite. That's my favorite thing to talk about. Being that was one of the first things that I designed and delved into, and one of the founding systems of what Cradle is. So, combat in Cradle is not hack and slash, and is instead a skill-based system where your intent and where what you want to do as a player translates directly in and enables it so that your skill, the choices you make, and are the only thing that determines the outcome of battle. So we're tired of the same feeling that you get in a really awesome MLG-style video game. For example, Halo, a first-person shooter that has that beautiful, fluid, smooth first-person experience. We want to translate that and that skill and that player agency from that into melee combat. And so how we have done this is through a number of systems we've developed. The first of which is called deterministic combat animations. The idea here is that with each weapon that a player could use, and with each point that they could, or place that they could look to attack on an enemy, there are certain moves that make sense to do with that weapon, and there are other moves that simply don't. When you're aiming at somebody's right torso, for right in terms of you're looking at right to you, then it doesn't make sense for you to do a left slash across from the left side of your body to the right to hit that point. It's not what you would do if you were that swordsman. And so instead, with simply the two mouse buttons, the left and right mouse button, you were given the choices of doing either, and this is all in real time because it's mapped for every weapon it's the same, or I'm sorry, for every enemy it's the same, and it only varies from weapon to weapon. So in real time, you're given this choice of whether or not I would like to either stab at the right-hand side of the body or slash from my right across to left at that side of the body. So you can take this and apply this to all the different places you could look on an enemy. And it's not everywhere, of course, because it's only the places that make sense. So you have left and right head, left and right shoulder, left and right arm, left and right torso, left and right lower or legs. And what this enables is for players to have easy to know, because this is the same from enemy to enemy, and it only changes from weapon, and each character class is limited to 6 different weapons. that are, of course, all unique to that character class. What this does is it provides a system that is non-changing, and players can learn and pick up with very quickly, because the system is the same from weapon to weapon, other than the choices you are given. So take this idea and then apply this next system. So now that we're looking wherever we want and attacking with whatever animation that makes sense to play for that attack, looking at that place, we also include something called order determinism. Which is the idea that where you last attacked has an effect on how you do your next attack. So in real sword combat, just to use the left and right torso to be very simple again, if you look at the right-hand side of the body and Cradle, and you swing to cut across from the right to the left across, well, if you want to do a cut back from the left to the right, you would never return to guard in between those two attacks. Mm-hmm. That just doesn't make sense. So in Cradle, the system knows that if you slashed from right to left across on the right torso, and then look to the left and click to slash from left to right, it'll go directly from one move to the next, and translate that intent and that fluidity that you would have in real combat, rather than going back to guard and being clunky. So those are two systems. The third one that I'll talk about is weapon weight and blocking, and just weapons in general. So as I said, each weapon is unique and different with their own strengths and weaknesses, and of course, unique to their character classes. We've balanced each character class to have the weapons that they would need to fight the myriad of enemies that they will see in Cradle. And through this, we also have this idea of weapon weight and blocking. So not all weapons are created equal, in the sense that if you have a short, light sword, you're not going to have a massive impact if somebody blocks you with a big shield. However, if you have a huge hammer and somebody's blocking with a small shield, that's going to push that person. That's going to have an effect on that person, whether it's knockback and stun or knocking them down. And so the idea is we've translated this into the weapons of the game, so that blocking or dodging is a real choice for players. The last thing that I'll talk about is what we use or what we like to call order determinism, which is the idea that in real sword combat, if you're too close with an opponent, then you can't. Simply, you can't aim anymore. You can't swing your sword. You are all tangled up with them. And so in real combat, you would make space. And that's a problem you see in a game like Skyrim, where you get too close to an enemy and you just end up swinging around hoping you kill whatever's in front of you. And instead, once you are too close to make a meaningful swing, you then push off of your opponent in varying different ways depending on how you are looking at them and what weapon you have and the distance. And so you push off of them to create space and get back to squaring off in that normal fighting style. And so we have a number of other little tweaks and what I like to call sort of our secret sauce that we use to bring it the fluidity and dynamicism we want. But those are the basic innovations behind that. And so what this sums up to is a system where wherever you're aiming changes how you're attacking to make sense to how you would want to attack. And then between each attack, they are then flowing from attack to attack in a way that you would also want. And you were essentially mimicking all the good feeling and all of what you would want from real sword combat, without the clunkiness and that you would get from the system or the controls built around that system. We want to provide that MLG, that skill-based experience to first-person melee that we haven't. Chivalry, you know of Chivalry, yes?
Yes, I've heard of Chivalry.
We look at that as a really good step, and first off, it's an awesome game, but it's a really good step in the right direction of how to create sword combat that is skillful between opponents, and something that where you can go, shit, that one action I just made is the reason I lost. It wasn't because, what the hell, that was a random dice roll, I died. Right. And so just as Chivalry is based on timing and trajectory, Cradle is based on blocking, aiming, and weapon choice, and also the choices you make as to where to fight.
Well, that's one of the things I've made this discussion in some of my videos previously, in which I'm not necessarily a huge fan of RPGs because I don't like everything being percentage based. I don't. Mm-hmm. There was an RPG, I believe it was Zone of the Enders First of Mars for the Game Boy Advance, in which when you attacked an enemy, you actually got to control your attack and what you were doing, whereas in a game like Fire Emblem, while I was still a fan of that game, everything was percentage-based, whether you dodged, whether you hit, how much damage you did, and it it doesn't really feel like I have a huge impact in what's going on when it's even percentage based. Now, that kind of idea has branched out into other RPGs with the sort of percentage is like a game like Borderlands, which is a first person shooter with RPG elements. Even though it's not as percentage based, what you do, what damage you do is all based really upon the stats of the weapons you have and the stats you have, and not what you do as a player.
So Cradle wants to. We like to maintain this idea of progression and that feeling you get from an RPG, no question of that. And so in Cradle, the way we handle this idea of needing to progress and needing to have skill, as you said, and stats to weapons and whatnot, we balance in the way we balance that with the need for having a system that is based on entirely the actions you take is through our weapon and augment system, or weapon and armor augment system, excuse me. So what this allows is instead of having you get new weapons throughout the game that are better or worse, and you have this sort of linear progression that most RPGs follow, what happens in Cradle is we have combined this idea of skill trees and that progression into one sort of thing. So weapon augments are the way that you power and increase your capabilities with your weapons, and also how it's a strategic point in that each weapon has a total of 5 augments that can be applied to each, with a total of 5 different forces that each of these augments could be applied as. So there's fire, water, light, life, and earth. Yeah, and those are the 5 forces of the world, that the fabric and the energy that has created the fabric of the world and made Anora, and made this planet, or this whole environment. And with these forces, with your use of these forces, you are able to fuel your weapons to do new and different effects. Each of these different 5 forces has a different effect on your weapon that you can tech into. So whether it's fire and you have a new ability to deal more damage and also to provide a damage over time effect when you hit enemies, to water, where you're increasing your animation speed and your attack speed and also providing other interesting effects. What this allows players to do is both customize to their own sort of play styles with their weapons, and also have variety in the way they want to play. So with each of these 5, since there are 5 augments per weapon total, the player has a choice of how they're going to tech up, in a sense, into each of these different forces with each weapon. Whether you want to go all fire in one weapon is a choice you have to make, because of this idea that to fuel these weapon augments, to fuel and to provide these awesome effects, you have to have mana, which is the resource you collect to, as I said, fuel these things. And so there's a mana for each of the 5 forces, and Cradle mana is a little different. It's the physical manifestation of the magic and the damage done to the land of Adaryn's world. And this is literally the lifeblood of the land bleeding from the environment that you then collect to fuel and power your weapons. And so you have to each time you tech up in one of these new augments. So if you go to, let's say, level 3 with one of your weapons in fire, then you have to use more fire mana to power that augment. And so it becomes a strategic choice which weapons you upgrade with what augments and how you want to do that. Now, we don't want to make players feel encumbered through this system either, and that they have to be constantly worrying about mana and collecting it all the time in a way that takes away from the game. So what we do as well is that although you need mana to power these augments and to make them do their full effects, even without mana, they still have a diminished effect that is better, and that continues and is persistent regardless of your mana.
Now, Cradle is the first game that you guys are making as Mojo Game Studios, which it's kind of a big risk to take since you don't really have a kind of community built up yet to really go all out with this kind of game. But one thing I always like to ask the people I interview is, what got you into making games? What made you want to make games, and what have you worked on previous?
So Cradle is the first game I've ever made, and that a lot of us have ever made in terms of a full-scale AAA-style production. I have made a number of little games myself, none of them that have titles that you would even care about. And I have worked through that process. Some of our other members have worked on games like Orion Prelude, let's see, what's his name? Grand Theft Auto 5 was actually worked on by one of our members. Marvin Ayer, our character artist, has worked on a myriad of different games from Uncharted to I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But so that's that experience. But how we really came about Cradle and how we started and got into making games and making Cradle was the fact that I wanted to, and then this collectively became a we as the team built. We wanted to sort of be the change, and I know this sounds cliche, but be the change we wish to see in the industry, in the sense that we are all gamers. I've been playing games since before I could write, or I was 2. I was sitting on my mom's lap, reading or watching her play games and doing my best to interact with them as she'd play. And so for all of our lives, we have all been gamers, and we have loved the experience of gaming. And we have seen in the past few years a lot of the same stuff come out, a lot of sequels, a lot of the same games that don't have too many innovations in terms of what they do from a gameplay system standpoint. And we feel that in our experience of playing games and in our lifetime, we've gone through a lot of gaming revolutions in a sense. Whether we're talking, in the early 90s with the release of games like Doom and the first-person push, or if we're talking in the early 2000s when we had games like Halo coming out and such. We got to experience these amazing innovations as we grew up, and we want to bring that experience to a new generation. And that's why we set out to, and how we got into this. We had an idea, and we had some really solid gameplay systems, and we built from there. We had a dream, and we had passion, and as we have grown, we have fleshed out that dream and continued to fill it in from design to implementation. And the reason we are able to get the team we have, as you said, we have a pretty big team. And you would say, how can you have such a big team when everybody's royalty based, especially considering you guys have, or we have some industry experience that have been there for a long time. Marvin's a 7-year character artist. We have our business manager, he's over 50 years old. He has plenty of industry, knowledge and experience with this. And so we have a lot of different acquired talent that may seem beyond this. But the reason we're able to bring these people together is because we all share in this vision. We want to make this happen. This is our dream. And that is why we do what we do.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me today, Hank, about your game Cradle, looking to raise $350,000 for their Kickstarter. Do you have any context for yourself or for Mojo Game Studios for people to keep track of the development of the game?
Absolutely. There's a couple different ways. So for people who want to follow the development of our game, they should check out either our Facebook, which is just Facebook or Mojo Game Studios at Facebook, our Twitter, which is just Mojo Game Studios on Twitter, or our website, which is mojogamestudios.com. People who would like to get in touch with me specifically or learn more about the game can either email me at Zwally@mojogamestudios.com or can email us in general just at Mojo, and it will go to the right place and be filtered at mojogamestudios@gmail.com. If anyone is interested in, of course, we have our Kickstarter running. There's a lot of information up there, and we can always get in contact via our website as well. And anyone who would like any sort of questions that may need to be answered or so forth, I did an AMA on Reddit a few days ago that I've answered quite a few questions through, so you're always welcome to check there as well.
Well, thank you again for talking to me, and thank you, viewers, for watching. Be sure to follow the links in the description. There'll be links to the Kickstarter page, as well as Mojo Game Studios' website, and all of their contacts will be down there. So if you want to follow the game, be sure to do that. The game really sounds interesting, and I'll be looking forward to what you guys come up with in the future. This has been MegapiemanPHD with another Jumpstart developer interview, talking to Hank Zwally from Mojo Game Studios about their game Cradle. Talk to you guys later.